Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is the 17th of January. It's a cold day here in Memphis. It's icy. So we're having our Parsha shir. We're doing it remotely today. And I hope everyone is staying warm and staying safe. Okay, it's as I said, it's Wednesday, the 17th of January, and we're getting ready for Parshas Bo. What I want to do with you today is share with you some insights I saw in Rav Zalman Sorotskin's beautiful Sefer Aznaim LaTorah. We quote it all the time. I was looking at it this week for Parshas Bo, and I saw he has so many beautiful pieces in there. I want to share several of them with you this week. So let's jump right in. We're looking towards the end of the Parsha. It's in Perek Yud Beis, that's chapter 12, when Bnei Yisrael are on the verge of leaving Mitzrayim. The Exodus is finally taking place. So the pasuk says, "Vayisu Bnei Yisrael miRamses Sukosa." So the Jewish people, they leave Egypt by way of Ramses, going towards Sukkos. Kishesh meos elef ragli hagvarim levad me'etaf. And there are 600,000 on foot. That's just counting the men, not even counting the children or the women. So there's obviously it's going to factor once you say the men, and that's just until the age of 60. So they say the figure is probably between 2 and 3 million people. V'gam erev rav Allah itam. There also was a great mixed multitude that went up with them. V'tzonu bakar miknei kaved ma'od. And there were a lot of flocks and cattle, a lot of livestock. What Rabbi Sorotskin's going to do here is focus on the erev rav. The erev rav was this mixed multitude of other nationalities who were in Mitzrayim at the time, and they decided to throw their lot with the Jewish people and to leave. Let's see what Rabbi Sorotskin does with them. He's going to to share with us a beautiful insight of the Gra, the Vilna Gaon. We'll see soon where I've seen the Vilna Gaon say this, and you'll see how Rav Sorotskin uses this idea from the Gaon to help us understand these psukim, and then to help us understand something else in Bereshis as well. So let's see. V'gam erev rav Allah itam. And it says the Torah was very specific. When it said that the erev rav joined Bnei Yisrael, it used the word itam. It did not say imam, it said itam. And we'll see that that's very important. So the pasuk says this, Rav Sorotskin writes as follows. What is an erev rav? Taruvas umos shalgerim. It was this mixed multitude of converts. Now, these weren't necessarily sincere converts. These were people who just wanted to join the Jewish people now that they see that things are moving in the right direction for them. Again, I'm sure there were some in there who may have been sincere, but for the most part, these were people who caused some real tsaras, and we say that our commentaries tell us they were behind the Cheda Egel, the sin of the golden calf. Let's see. So Sorotskin writes as follows. Kvar B'Yarnu, we already explained in Bereshis, Yud Beis Daled, chapter 12 in Bereshis, verse 4. We'll see there soon, and it's interesting because there he didn't quote the Vilna Gaon, but you'll see that's the principle he's using. B'Shem Agra, he says, I've already introduced the concept in the name of the Vilna Gaon. Sheyesh nafka mina, there's a huge difference ben ito le'imo. When the Torah uses the word ito or itam, and then when the Torah uses imo or imam. And here the Torah specifically said itam. She'imo, if the Torah uses the word imo, misamen dvekos nafshios b'matara achas. It shows that all the parties are involved are on the same page. They have a soulful connection and they have the same spiritual mission. V'ito, but if the Torah uses the word ito, that's dvekos chitzonios. That is just an external connection, b'matara shonos. But ultimately, people may be walking on the same path, but they're doing it for different reasons. The Erev Rav shenis gayer, and in quotation marks, this Erev Rav, this mixed multitude that converted, meaning didn't do it sincerely, but rather just wanted to join up with the Jewish people. Halach itam velo imam. The Torah is very specific in the word that it uses in describing the joining together of the Erev Rav with the Jewish people. It used the word itam. It says that they joined itam with them. It did not say imam. What does that indicate? That it was just on the externals, it may have looked like they were together, but they did not share the same soulful mission. They were not on the same page through and through. They did not join the Jewish people with the true melding of the souls. They did not join because they say, we want to be under the wings, the protective wings of the God of Israel, and we want to accept the Torah together with Am Yisrael. That's not what their attitude was. Heimranu Mahapecha. They saw this massive upheaval that happened to Egypt. It was the mightiest power in the world. These were the underclass in the slave society in Egypt. And they say, wow, we just saw this massive upheaval. V'nilvu Allah his haretz mitachas yad adonim kashim mitzrayim. And they said, here's an incredible opportunity to break out. The Jewish people are leaving. All we got to do is say, we want to be part of you. And now we can break out of Egypt to get away from our taskmasters. These converts, Hayukashim Yisrael Yoser Misapachas. This is an expression Chazal uses, is that these converts were more difficult to the Jewish people than a terrible skin disease. They're the ones who were really responsible for making the golden calf, which was a terrible, terrible desecration of God's name, one of the worst sins we've ever been involved with on the national level. They were the ones who drew us into that. If we really want to understand the nature of this Erev Rav, this mixed multitude, look what the pasuk says. Look what the pasuk writes about them. It says the Erev Rav went out with Bnei Israel. Again, I use the word itam, and using the Gra, the Vilna Gaon's principle, itam indicates that they may have been together in some external fashion, but they were not through and through on the same page. Then it says Vitsonu Bakar. The pasuk continues to say about all the cattle and livestock. Shemana ito hakasuv imatzon v'abakar b'chada machsa. The pasuk groups them together. The Erev Rav groups them together with the livestock. K'moshe darshu Chazal, like what Chazal says, Shuvu lechem poi machamor, that when Avram went with the Akedah, with Yitzchak to bind him, he says to Yishmael, stay behind here with the chamor. Amadom el chamor, meaning that you guys are in the same category with the donkey. So same kind of idea here. When the Torah uses the word itam, it's telling us this Erev Rav, they were never fully committed. They were never on the same page, and this was just in the externals. It looked like they were together with Am Yisrael, but they were never committed. They were never on the same page. That's a crucial idea, using what that Vilna Gaon's principle about the difference between imam and itam. Okay, let's see. He said he already used this idea in Bereshis 12, in Bereshis Yud Beis. He said that he already used this, and now you'll see that I want to show you where he used it. And interestingly enough, when we see it in Bereshis Yud Beis, I don't think he mentions the Gaon. I don't think he mentions the Vilna Gaon, but here you see in Shmos, he's telling you that's where I got this idea from. It probably was just it was something he looked past. He was in a rush to print his Sefer. He forgot to credit the Gra in Bereshis, but here in Shmos, he clearly tells you that's what the idea was based on. So let's see what it was. We're on page 2 now, in Bereshis Yud Beis. So this is when Lot is now joining Avraham on their mission to leave Haran and go to Canaan, following God's advice. Then they go to Egypt, then they go back to Canaan. So let's see. Vayelech Avram kasher diber Hashem. So the pasuk says that Avram went just like Hashem told him. Vayelech ito Lot. Then the pasuk says Lot accompanied him. And then the pasuk says Vavram ben chamesh shanim v'shivim shana b'tzeis mechron. Oh, by the way, Avram was 75 years old when he left Haran. So you're going to see Rav Sorotzkin has a number of questions on this pasuk, and using the Vilna Gaon's principle, it all fits like a glove. He says, "Vayelech Avram kasher diber elav Hashem." So Rav Sorotzkin writes, "Ma ba kosav lashmiyenu." What's the pasuk telling us? V'chiyav shar haya leleches bofen acher. Why does the pasuk say, oh, by the way, Avram went because God told him to? We've already been told in the Torah that this whole reason why Avram was leaving was Hashem spoke to him. Do I think there was some other reason why Avram would have left his comfortable zone where he had family, we had friends, we had everything that was where he had been raised? There's no other reason why Avram would have left. Of course it was because of what Hashem told him. That's question number 1. Vayelech ito Lot, and then the pasuk says that Lot joined him. V'lo gam hu haya mi beis aviv. Why did Lot join him? If God told Avram, I need you to leave Beis Aviv, I need you to leave all those foreign influences, I need you to leave your father's household, so then what's he doing bringing Lot along? He's bringing he's saying, I want you to get a fresh start. You're not getting a fresh start if you bring along Lot. That's the second question. And then it says, V'Avram ben chamesh shanim v'shivim shana b'tzeis mechron. It tells us Avram was 75 when he left Haran. Why now does the Torah pick this is the time to tell us how old Avram was. Why now? Why does it, of all the places it could have given us that information, why now? And also, if you're going to tell me that information that he was 75 years old, why did you interrupt it? You interrupted the flow. Say, okay, Avram, when he left, he was 75. Why do you say Avram left? Because Hashem told him. Lot joined him. Oh, and by the way, he was 75. Why are you sticking that in there right in the middle? That's not neat. So let's see. So now he says, Ayin be Hadeya v'Hadibur Chelakal of Drush Ches. So that is this svarim of Drushos that Rav Sorotzkin wrote. And he says, Sham Biarnu, there we explain. Now there, I'm assuming he quoted the Gra. Here he doesn't mention him by name. So here he's just saying, I'll just give you a quick summary of what I wrote in my longer Drushos. So he says, Shalotan, Avram was ready to leave everyone behind, including Lot. But Lot had the following argument. Lotan, Shu Mamin Beloke Avraham. He says, no, Avram, don't leave me behind. I believe in that same God that you're preaching about. And you know what? I want to help you. You're on this mission to inform the world of monotheism, that there's a creator. I want to help you in that because I believe in all that. It goes, and he says to Avram, if you're going to start bringing with you the people, the disciples that have gathered around you in Haran, who've already bought into the monotheism, then Achiv lo kol shekain. Me as your nephew, you're not going to bring me along? Certainly you would. So v'huchrach Avram lakachto. Therefore, Lot had a very convincing argument, and that compelled Avram to bring him along with him. So he says that's how he's addressing that first question. So again, Rav Sorotzkin had asked, what's he doing bringing Lot? If the whole purpose of Lech Lecha was to get away from everything that was familiar in your family, Beis Aviv, why are you bringing Lot? Because Lot made a compelling argument that I'm on board with you, Avram, and I want to help you in your mission. And if you're going to bring your disciples, you got to bring me, your nephew. So further, but then the Torah wants to tell us as kavanaso amiti shalot. But then the pasuk wants to tell us what was the real kavana, what was the real intent of Lot. Was he so l'shem shamayim? Did he have such good intentions that he wanted to be Avram's partner in this mission of spreading monotheism? Is that why Lot joined him? It says no. Vayelech Avram kasher diber elav Hashem. It tells us that Avram went along for the most pure reasons. Avram left Haran and went to Canaan purely because that's what God had asked of him. Machshava acheres lo haislo. He had no other intent. Rak lasos ritzon kono. All he wanted to do was fulfill God's will. But then it tells us about Lot. Vayelech ito Lot. And now we're using the Graz principle, the Vilna Gaon's idea that ito is not like imo. Imo would mean they're 100% on the same page. Ito, on the other hand, means, yeah, externally they look like they're acting the same, but deep down they've got very different interests. That's what the Torah used in describing Lot. Look what the pasuk said. Again, I'm just going up a little. It's in Vayelech Avram kasher diber elav Hashem. Vayelech ito Lot. Lot went with him on the ito idea. Now he says in parentheses, this is the Vilna Gaon's principle. Yodua she'ito misamen dvekos chitzonis b'deir shonos. That when the Torah uses the word ito, according to the Vilna Gaon, it means externally it looks like they're on the same page. The imo, but if the Torah had chosen to use the word imo, that would indicate dvekos pnimis b'deir achas. That would indicate that they have one absolute intent, even through and through. But the Torah did not use imo. It doesn't say that imo that they were 100% on the same page. It used ito, that externally they were on the same page. They were going through the motions together. So velo imo, the Torah did not write imo. Ratzal Omar, what's the Torah telling us about Lot? Halach bedvekos chitzonis. It looked at the externals, it looked like he was attached to Avram. V'lo machshavos Avram machshavos Lot. But the true intent of Avram and the true intent in Lot could not have been more different. Avram was only in the mission of fulfilling God's will. But Lot had something entirely different in mind. What was Lot's intent? What was the true intent of Lot? Why was he so adamant that he wanted to accompany Avram? So that's what the pasuk's telling us at the end. Avram ben chamesh shanim v'shivim shana b'tzeiso mecharon. Because Avram at this point was 75 years old. Umi pesi yazov es dodo. What fool would abandon their uncle, their rich uncle. In other words, Lot is a nephew, and now he finds out his rich uncle Avram, who's already 75 years old, who does not have a family, does not have children. Lot says, I'm next in line. I'm not going to let him leave Haran, and then when he passes away, his all of his resources, all of his assets are just going to be dissipated and go to all of his students. I'm sticking with him, because if I stick with Uncle Avram, who's already 75 years old, when he kicks the bucket, when he buys the farm, it's all coming my way. That's what he says. Mi pesi yazavas dodo. What fool would leave their uncle who has not yet been blessed with children? Marisho Zaken Vashir, who is the one who he stands to inherit from, who's elderly and he's wealthy. Haolech la'aretz lo yadua rechusho imo, and he's leaving to a foreign land with all of his wealth. No one's going to let that opportunity slip away. That was the true motivation of Lot. That's why the Torah here tells us that Lot left Haran and joined Avram, and it made a point of using a different word. It said ito instead of imo, to indicate that he did not have such lofty ideas, and it tells us, makes a point of telling us, yeah, by the way, Avram was 75 years old. Now that gives us an indication as to what Lot's true motivation was for joining Avram Avinu. That's why it mentions it here. The real place where it should have mentioned this, that Lot left, was earlier in Parak A. Why to mention it here? Specifically because this will help us understand what was motivating him. It's no mistake that then the Torah tells us how old Avram was. Lomar, to tell us, that was his true intent. So beautiful. So what did Sorotzkin do? He took that same principle of the Gra, of the Vilna Gaon, of the difference between Ito and Imo, or Itam and Imam, and he used that, as we just saw in our Parsha, in Parshas Bo, where he also tells you, I used this also in Bereshis to show us in Lech Lecha how we use this. And now I'm going to share with you, this is to the best of my knowledge, this is the original source, or at least what I've seen. I'm not in any way a Baki. I'm not an expert in the Vilna Gaon's writing and in his Perushim, but this is the place where I'm familiar with seeing this used. And I think I once shared this with the class. It's in Parshas Balak that the Vilna Gaon uses this to completely unlock Parshas Balak, because Parshas Balak begins with that mercenary for hire, Bilam, that he's just minding his own business, and then one day these ambassadors of Balak show up and they start asking him, we'd like you to join us, come back with us to Moab, because we need you to curse the Jewish people. And Bilam wants to join them, but God comes to him in the night and he says, no, you're not supposed to join. But then later he does join. And it looks so confusing that God initially told him not to, and then he says he gives him a right to, and then it tells him to do. There's so many questions at the beginning of Parshas Balak to make sense of all this, because it's so not clear from God what he wanted out of Bilam. And the Vilna Gaon uses this idea. This is where I saw it. And maybe he does bring it up earlier in the Torah, but this is where I was familiar with it, how the Vilna Gaon uses this to completely unlock Parshas Balak and make it fit like a glove. And I just want to share with you a couple lines of what he does there. I'm not showing you here how he uses it to answer up every question that could be raised in Parshas Balak, but just here is the principle. So it says here, I'm on the bottom of page 2, where I have the finger pointing towards the end of that line, Amnam Yevuar, it is explained, Ki yesh chiluk ben tevas im o imo. There's a huge difference when the Torah uses im, imo, imam, or then tevas es o ito, or if the Torah says es, ito, or itam. Ki tevas im, if the Torah uses the term im, yora hashivoy bedavar hahu. It shows that there's an absolute, they're absolutely synonymous. They're 100% equal. The Kamairi pu'ula shneim al kavana achas mamash, and it tells us that not only were the external actions the same, but the intent, the kavana of both parties was 100% on the same page. The chol davar sheshneim osim. If you see two people that are doing something, davar el kavana v'ratzon echad. If the Torah says the expression of im, imo, imam, it means that not only did the external actions line up, but the intent was 100% the same as well. They had the same interests. V'gam ein echad nif'al mechavero shaykh lashon im. And there's no difference between the two parties whenever the Torah uses the expression of im. However, tevas es o ito, but if the Torah says es, ito, or itam, yoresh hagam shemosim ze adavar biyachad, even though it looks like to the naked eye, it looks like that they're going through the same motions. Ach lo al kavana achas v'liba meina shavim. But their hearts and their intent, they're not unified. Each party is doing this for their own reasons. Shekol echad yesh lo kavana acheres b'davrahu. Each party is going about the same actions, the same motions, but they're doing it for completely different interests. That's where I was familiar with the Vilna Gaon introducing us to this concept. Again, he may have done this in his commentary earlier in the Torah. That's just the one that I'm familiar with. But you see, here's this idea of the Vilna Gaon. And again, Rav Sorotzkin, he says, keep this in your tool chest because you never know when it'll be handy. And Rav Sorotzkin says, thank you, Vilna Gaon. I used your trick. I used that lesson that you taught us to unlock something in Sefer Bereshis. And I also used that to unlock something in Sefer Shemos in our Parsha, in Parshas Bo. I thought that was very, very cool. Okay, let's move on to page 3. We're going to see something else from Sorotzkin, which is great. So the Torah tells us as follows: when they're finally leaving Mitzrayim. So again, we're back in Parak Yud Beis, Parshas Bo, Pasuk Mem and Mem Aleph. It says, "Moshav b'nei Yisrael asher yashvu b'Mitzrayim." How long was the habitation? How long was the time that Bnei Yisrael actually lived in Egypt? It says Shloshim Shana v'Arba Me'ot Shana, 430 years. Then it tells us again, it was exactly when 430 years had passed by, and it was high noon on that day. That's when all the legions of the Lord, that's when all of Bnei Yisrael leave Egypt. Now, there's an obvious question here. We know the math. We know that Bnei Yisrael did not spend 430 years in Egypt. We know they spent 210 years in Egypt. So what's with this extra 220 years? It says here that they spent 430 years in Egypt. We know that's not the case. They spent 210. So let's see. So Chazal are very attuned to this. And they say that, yeah, true, Bnei Israel only spent 210. So what's with this 430? So they were including from the Bris Bein Habsarim, from the time of the covenant between the parts, where Hashem told Avram that your children will be in the land that's not theirs, and even earlier, all of Avram's wanderings, that's when the clock starts ticking to get to 430. So let's see. Rav Sorotzkin writes as follows: Asher Yashru b'Mitzrayim. So it says that how much time did Bnei Israel live in Egypt? 430 years. Shivim Mazikanim, the 70 elders. Now again, we're very close to the anniversary of that. That was in the month of Teves, either the 7th or the 8th of Teves is when that happened. That's when you had the episode that we call the Targum Shivim. We've spoken about this before. That was when the 70 elders, in Latin was called the Septuagint. That's when the 70 elders of the Zakanim of Chazal were put into rooms separated by Talmai Hamelach, who was a king of Egypt, and he wanted them to translate the Torah into Greek. So this is when, the Greek influence, they had their dynasty set up in Egypt. So that's what he did. And the Gemara tells us there was a number of edits that they made. They said it's going to look very bad for Bnei Yisrael if we give them a literal translation into Greek of the Torah. So they made a number of edits. And the miracle was, even though there was no communication between these Shivim Zakanim, between these 70 elders, nonetheless, they all had the intuition to make the same 70 changes. So it was united. One of the changes that they made was right here, because they said the history doesn't match up. It says in the Torah that we spent 430 years in Egypt, but we only spent 210 in Egypt. How do you account for the other 220 years? So here's what the edit that they made. Sorotzkin's quoting the Gemara in Megillah. It says, Shiva Mazakanim, the 70 elders, Shetirgamu Torah L'Talmai Hamelach, when they translated the Torah into Latin, or Greek rather, Greek for Talmai Hamelach, Hosifu, they added the words, Uvishar Aratzos. That it wasn't just Mitzrayim. It's saying that Bnei Yisrael spent 430 years in Egypt and also in other lands, meaning all the years of their wandering, starting from when Avram hit the road. Sharei b'Mitzrayim Yurak Redushana. In Egypt, they were only there for 210 years. So he goes, I get it. That's all great that they thought of a clever way to make it that Talmai Hamelech wouldn't pull out his historians and say the Torah lied. Okay, that was very clever. that they threw in those extra words, Uvishar Aratzos, that 430 is the real number of the time we spent in Egypt and wandering around other lands. That's true. But why did the Torah, Rav Sorotzkin wants to know, but I get it, the Zakanim were geniuses for changing it, but why was the Torah okay with that? It can't be that the Torah was disingenuous and then the Zakanim come along and say, okay, we got to make this look better. It must be that on some level, it is true. We were in Egypt for 430 years. How do you say that? But we were only in Egypt for 210. So I love the fact that it's miraculous what the sages did. But at the end of the day, isn't the Torah truthful? What does the Torah mean when the Torah says we were in Egypt for 430 years? So great question. I never thought about this before. Let's see what Sorotzkin does with it. So he says, how could the Torah write something? The Torah's God's book, and God's all about truth. V'yesh lomar, here's how to answer it. He says, I've got an approach which takes care of this. She'eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan, going back to the time of the Avos, of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Eretz Canaan haisa oz lemas leMitzrayim. At that time, the most powerful nation in the world, in the region, was Egypt. And Egypt charged tribute. They charged taxes of all their neighbors. And if you didn't pay the tax, they'd send in an army to conquer you. So to a certain degree, even living in Canaan, they were not independent from Egypt. So while they may not have technically moved to Egypt and spent time in Egypt's borders, except for 210 years, but from the time of the Avos, they were subservient to Egypt because they were in Canaan, which was a vassal state, you might say. It was paying taxes to Egypt. That's how he wants to learn it. It was a country that had to pay taxes, had to give tribute to Egypt, or they would get whooped. Therefore, to a certain degree, it was considered an extension of Egypt. The same way you think back to the Soviet era. So you had those Eastern Bloc states. Everyone says, okay, even though they were called, Belarus and Latvia, all those places, everyone knows at the end of the day, they were under the authority of the Soviet Union. They were part of Russia. They may have, humored them by letting them have their own independent name. But at the end of the day, they were under the authority of Russia. So he's saying that was the historical reality of Canaan at the time of the Avos. They were under the authority of Mitzrayim. They were paying heavy tribute to Egypt. And therefore they were considered part of Egypt. And that's what it says, Asher Yeshu b'Mitzrayim, when the Torah says they spent 430 years in Egypt. Hakavanahi, what does it mean? B'Mitzrayim, it means actually within the borders of Egypt, plus Uvartzos hamishubedeslo, and to the nation and in the countries that were mishubad, which were, so to say, enslaved, were forced to pay tribute to Egypt. So in other words, if someone lived in the Eastern Bloc at the time of the Soviet Union, someone lived in, let's say, Latvia, and that was that was in the Eastern Bloc. So you could say, yeah, they spent all those years living in Russia. What do you mean? They weren't in Russia proper? Yeah, but they were living in a country that was under the authority of Russia. That's how he's basically dealing with this here. So he says, and he goes up, and I'll even prove this to you. Nemar, I think that is an abbreviation, Tufshin, but I don't know if that's Torah Shlema or maybe that's Torah Shlema, because the Torah Shlema was by Rav Kasha, but I don't know. I don't know if that's Torah Shlema. B'Shem Even Ezra HaKatzer. So we know that the Even Ezra, he wrote a longer version and a shorter version. It seems like he's quoting someone who quoted the Even Ezra HaKatzer. Shekanad Haisu Az Tachas Yad Mitzrayim. So it sounds like the Even Ezra said this straight out, that at the time of the Avos, that Canaan was under the boot of Egypt. V'hosef Even Ezra, and even adds, Shetzarch Lavi Rayalzeh. He throws in that I need to bring a proof. It seems like the Even Ezra had a theory that Mitzrayim at the time of the Avos was under the authority of Egypt, but he said, I need to find a good proof for it, and left it at that. So now Rav Sorotzkin says, I'll show you a proof. Venerally Raya Mefureshis, Me'or Bereshis Rabbah, Perak Ayin Aleph, Ayin Hey rather. He goes, I'll show you something that's in the Medrash. The Medrash really indicates this, that Canaan was paying heavy taxes to Egypt. She'esav lakach agrome mimitzrayim. It says in the Medrash that Esav took agrome from Egypt. Amar, and he said, Yechilnole hatav. He says, if I'm able to do this to Yaakov, then it's all good. Vamarle, aminale, I see mikise. So let's see, what did that all mean? Uva Aruch Pirish, the Aruch explaining that medrash says, what does it mean, agrome? Rishus lital mas. In other words, what Esav wanted to take from Egypt was the permission to levy taxes. And it sounds like that Egypt did have financial control, did dominate Canaan at that time in history. And what Esav took was the authority, took, I guess, some governmental position, the authority to collect taxes. That Esav wants to steal all the financial wealth that Yaakov has. So how does he do it? So Esav, according to this medrash, went to the king of Egypt, Lios Mochsan Beretz Canaan, because he wants to formally be given the post of the one in charge of Meches, the one in charge of taxes in Canaan. So what is this medrash saying? That this is part of the way that Esav wants to drag Yaakov down, was to rob him of all his resources. How does he do that? By going to Egypt and asking to have the official position of tax collector, which the medrash, according to this medrash, seems to indicate that Egypt dominated Canaan financially. Hooray, what do you see from this? Sheretz Canaan haisa kefufa tachas Mitzrayim. That at the time of the Avos, Egypt really did dominate Canaan. Canaan was subservient to Egypt. Lefichach nemar asher yashva b'Mitzrayim. Therefore, God forbid, the Torah is not lying. The Torah, when it said asher yashva Mitzrayim, how long did the Jews live under the domination of Egypt? Was 430 years. Yeah, 210 of that was in the borders of Egypt, but the other 220 in Canaan. And while they were wandering, even that is considered under the domination of Egypt. Even while they lived in Canaan. So I thought that's beautiful because, again, what Rav Sorotzkin did is he took a Gemara that I think many of us, if not all of us, are familiar with, that this is one of the changes that the sages made when they translated the Torah into Greek. But we're left with a good question. That was very clever by Chazal. The sages did a great job. But how did the Torah write something that seems to be dishonest? Now he's saying it's not dishonest. It's just we have to understand what it means. All they were doing when they translated into Greek was they were giving a perush. They were explaining what the Torah means. When the Torah said Asher Yashru b'Mitzrayim, it doesn't literally mean that they dwelled in Egypt, because they only dwelled in Egypt for 210 years. When it says Asher Yashru Mitzrayim, what it means is that how long did they dwell in Egypt and in lands that were subservient to Egypt? There we go. I thought that was very, very nice. And again, I found a lot of comfort in that, because anyone who's familiar with that Gemara and Megillah, that question should really bother us. And I don't know why it didn't bother me till now. All right, let's see the next piece from Sorotzkin here on the bottom of page 3. I thought this was also very, very interesting. The Torah writes in this Parsha about all the laws of Korban Pesach. And this is what we read on Parshas HaChodesh, and we're this Chodesh Hazel Lachem, and then and this is the week where we're going to, not this week. Parshas HaChodesh is when it's read, but it's this week's laning that it's going to be read from, where we're going to lead all the halachas of Korban Pesach. So one of the halachas is in this pasuk, Mem Gimel, Vayomar Hashem el Moshe v'Aaron zos chukas haPesach. This is the statute of the Korban Pesach. Kol ben nechar. No one who is estranged, yochabo. So anyone who is estranged, who is either not a member of Bnei Yisrael or has cut themselves off from Klal Yisrael. So there are two groups we're going to see who are told you're not allowed to participate in the Korban Pesach. One is someone who's not part of the Jewish people, and also someone who has cut themselves off from the Jewish people. So let's see, meaning a Jew who has cut themselves off. So he writes here, Kol ben nechar. So Sorotzkin writes, Aleph, there are two groups included here. Aleph, Yisrael Mishumad, a Jew who is an apostate, meaning either they've bought into another religion or they've done something which has given them the halachic status of a Mishumad. Ve'echad goy b'mashma. But it's according to Mechilta. This is what the matter says. So there's two parties that are excluded from Korban Pesach. A Mishumad, that's an apostate, a Jew who has opted out of Judaism to take another religion, even though they're still halachically Jewish, but since they've shown such a gross lack of respect to Yahadus by going through the motions of converting sincerely for another religion, that's called a Meshumad, that's called an apostate, they cannot participate in Korban Pesach until they do proper tshuva. And the second group is a goy, meaning a Gentile, someone who's not a member of Klal Yisrael. They can't eat the Korban Pesach either. I just want to pause here for a second. Every year Pesach time, I get a question from someone who says, I have a halacha question. Am I allowed to invite my non-Jewish friend, neighbor, acquaintance, someone to a Pesach Seder? And the reason why they think it's a problem is because of this pasuk. It's very clear that a goy, someone who's not a Jew, a Gentile, is not allowed to have a korban pesach. Nowadays, we don't have a korban pesach. So you're right. At the time that we were having a real korban pesach, it would have been a real a Torah problem to invite a non-Jew to a Pesach Seder. Nowadays, we don't have a korban Pesach, so that's not the problem. It's a different problem because the Pesach Seder is a Yom Tov meal, and this Pesach Seder is no different than every other Yom Tov. Is that there's a Gezerah D'Rabbanan? I'm not supposed to invite a non-Jew to a Yom Tov meal because there's a concern I might do some cooking on Yom Tov for him, and I'm only sanctioned. The Torah allows me to cook on Yom Tov for my fellow Jews. I'm not allowed to cook for an outsider. So this comes up all the time, and every now and then someone finds themselves in this situation, especially if they're inviting over someone who's intermarried and they want to have the Jewish spouse, but they also want to have they can't just have the Jewish spouse. The only way to do it is by having the non-Jewish spouse too. This question comes up, so there's ways to deal with this. If it ever comes up, I'm happy to give you some guidance. The easiest way to deal with this is years when Yom Tov and Shabbos coincide. If you want to invite a non-Jew to join for a Yom Tov meal, the easiest way is when Yom Tov and Shabbos coincide, because now no one could cook. It's Shabbos, so no one could cook. So it's no different than a Shabbos meal. You can invite a non-Jew. The other issue about inviting a Gentile to a Pesach Seder is it just might seem a little awkward. Again, there's nothing halachically wrong about this, but it might just seem very awkward. This is a very, very important moment in the life cycle of every Jewish member of Am Yisrael, where we're transmitting our heritage from one generation to the next. It's very intimate. It's very personal. And, inviting an outsider in to be part of that, and when it's real family time, that could just be very awkward. And I'll just end with this, and then we'll get back to our Sorotzkin. I have a memory when I was a little kid, we had on our block this really nice Catholic family, several houses down from me, and from my parents, my family, and really nice, the Soder family. And they had two kids, both of them were a little bit younger than me, Mikey and Nikki Soder, and we used to play together. We had a next door neighbor, Benji, who was Jewish, and me and Benji, we used to play with Mikey and Nikki. And when you're that little, you're all doing the same stuff. Our religions really never came up. We were playing Cowboys and Indians. We were playing Lone Ranger. We were playing G.I. Joe toys together. Whatever we were doing, what little boys do. So, religion never came up. There I was always wearing my blue Hebrew Academy yarmulke. But, they came to my house to play. I went to their house to play. And I remember one year it was Christmas. And I was so excited because Mikey and Nikki had just gotten they were telling me they were getting for Christmas that year a load of new G.I. Joe toys. So I found out I wanted to be there because I wanted to see these toys. I'd always seen them on TV and the G.I. Joe cartoons, but now I wanted to see these toys in real life. And I remember going over to their house. It was Christmas morning. I don't know why I wasn't in school. Maybe it was a Sunday morning. Maybe it was a snow day. I don't remember what it was. But I remember going to their house Christmas morning when they were opening their gifts. And I remember their mom saying to me, Mikey and Nikki's mom saying, Akiva, maybe you could come back later and play. This is really a family time now. And I said, oh, okay, yeah, I totally understand. But there I was with my blue Hebrew Academy yarmulke, sitting with them under their Christmas tree, and they were opening their gifts. Again, there was nothing religious going on. This was just a family time. It wasn't appropriate for me to be there with them. And I laugh about it now, saying like, wow, imagine what those pictures. I'm so glad no one had iPhones back then. Imagine what those pictures would have looked like. There I am with my blue Hebrew Academy yarmulke under the Christmas tree with them as they're opening their gifts. But anyhow, that was what their mom said. This is a family time. Maybe you could come back later and play. In a certain sense, that's also about Pesach and the Seder, is that's a real family time. That's something that's really intimate and that's important. I don't know how appropriate that would be, but again, that's not a halachic reason. The halachic issue that comes up nowadays where we don't have a korban Pesach is the issue of being certain that we're not going to cook on Yom Tov for a non-Jew. So let's just see what Rav Sorotzkin does here. It says, Kol ben nechar, so the Medrash in the Mechilta tells us, Echad Yisrael Mishumad, if it's a Jewish apostate, they're not supposed to take part in the korban Pesach. Vechad Goy, and also a Gentile, they're not supposed to take part. Ein Umasenu Uma Ela B'Torah Kedosha. Now he quotes from Sajagon, who tells us very famously, what defines us as a nation is our Torah. What defines the Jewish people as a nation is our Torah, because we can still be the Jewish nation even after we were exiled from Israel. Our land is huge important to us, but we can continue to retain our national identity even after we've been thrown out of Israel, even after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, by virtue of keeping our Torah. Lefichach Yisrael Mishuma, therefore a Jew who is an apostate, Ein lo chelek b'simchas Yisrael of a korban agula. That's why a Jew is an apostate who has opted out of the Jewish religion, has accepted another religion. They don't have a piece of being part of this massive festivity of Korban Pesach and bringing a korban, which is all about the gula, about the redemption. The goy and a Gentile, shenisgayer, as soon as that person converts, the kibla love old Torah mitzvah and accepts sincerely on themselves the willingness to live a life of Torah and mitzvahs, harehu shayich la'am Torah. Now they are connected. They are part of our nation because we are the Am HaTorah. We are the nation of Torah. Umishtatef b'korban Pesach al gulasenu. So here you can have someone who could say, "What do you mean you're excluding me? I'm a Jewish apostate, but look at my yichus. I go way back, way back. Look who my bubbies and zadies were. And you're not letting me in? But this Johnny come lately, this person who converted sincerely, you're letting that person in? Absolutely. Because what defines us as a people, as important as yichus is our commitment and our attachment to the Torah. So here when it comes to the Korban Pesach, we're saying here's someone, no matter how wonderful his yichus was, you're out. You can't be part of the Korban Pesach, but you could have someone who just converted last week, that they're part of this, they're welcome with open arms. Because what was the whole purpose of the Korban Pesach? It wasn't just to be redeemed, to be free. It was to be free, so now we could worship Hashem, so we could receive the Torah at Har Sinai. You know, we always say Moshe's famous speech to Paro was, let my people go. It didn't end there. It was, let my people go so they may serve him in the wilderness. It wasn't just to have absolute freedom. It was so we can be free to now live a life of Torah and mitzvahs. We can't forget that. That's what's so important. That's what Sorotsky is emphasizing. Ufidus nafshenu is a redemption of our souls. Nafshenu metumas hagoyim, because the whole intent was to redeem us from the filth of living in that pagan society, and now to give us the opportunity to draw close to Hashem through the Torah and the mitzvahs. In Perak Memphis, you'll see this over there as well. The Al Tisamad, this person should not question. So now you may ask, 1 second. In Egypt, why do I need the pasuk to say Kol Ben Nechar? I need the pasuk to tell me this is not just information, instructions for L'Dorei Doros for all generations. This was even for the first Korban Pesach. For the first Korban Pesach, I need to be told, I can understand, yeah, if there's Jewish apostates, they can't be part of it. Okay, unfortunately, there were Jewish apostates. But I also have to be told that non-Jews can't participate. What non-Jew in that first Pesach was going to say, oh, cool, let me be part of this? What does that mean? So he says, Va'al Tisama, a person should not be astonished and ask, could there really have been Egyptians in Egypt who wanted to eat the Korban Pesach? According to all the opinions that say these instructions were not just given for future generations, but even for that first Pesach. How could the locals have wanted to be part of this? What do you mean? It was repugnant to them to eat lamb. That was that was part of the whole story of the Korban Pesach. Why God specifically chose the lamb was to divorce us, was to get out of our mentality, this whole idea of buying into the philosophies and theologies of Egypt. So what local Egyptian will want to be part of this? I found in the Medrash as follows. When the Torah says, Shayareis Devar Hashem min Mitzrayim, Hivias B'charav Lalun Etzel Yisrael, it tells us that there were people who feared Hashem. There were Egyptians who said, wow, the government has gone too far. Paro's not letting the Jews out, but I don't want my kids to die in Makas Bechoros. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to move them in. I'm going to have my kids live in a Jewish house tonight, so hopefully they won't die. But it didn't help. We know that Makas Bechoros, even though the blood on the doorposts and Korban Pesach protects all the Jews inside, if any Egyptians had tried to find refuge there, they still would have died in Makas Bechoros. So probably what happened there were Egyptians who were in a panic saying, we want to save our lives. We want to save our kids' lives. So not only are we going to shtup them, we're going to stick them into Jewish houses that have blood on the doors, and they're eating a Korban Pesach. We're even going to have them eat Korban Pesach. Maybe that'll save them. Even though this was sacrilegious, if it's life or death, they're going to do this because they're willing to swallow whatever, literally swallow whatever theology they had in order to survive. So the plague wouldn't hit them. That's why the Torah says, Kol ben nechar lo yochal bo. No non-Jews are allowed to eat this, because probably there were going to be people who attempted to do so. So it was our job to make certain that even if we were forced, people stuck them in there, they have no business eating the Korban Pesach. Even if they would, it's not going to help them, but it's still our job to prevent them from doing so. I thought that was very, very interesting. Number one, just to make the point about why is it that the Korban Pesach, what's so unique about it, why we're not letting a Meshumad, an apostate Jew, eat it, but someone who just joined could eat it, because it's got nothing to do with yichus. The Korban Pesach was all about geula, about redemption. Redemption wasn't just a lack of slavery, freedom. It was freedom so we could serve Hashem. If this person's opted out of this, they have no business with the Korban Pesach. It's something always important to remember. It wasn't just let my people go. It was let my people go so they may serve me. We have to remember that the ultimate goal of the geula was for Kabbalas Torah, accepting the Torah and living lives of Torah and mitzvahs. All right, we're going to end it here. I have a page 4. But we don't have time for that on page 4, so we'll have to save that for another time. I'm going to turn off the record. If there's anyone who has any